Good evening, everybody, and my name is Christina. Welcome to Atlantic Institute's second book club for Marvels of the Heart. We have with us Dr. Scott Segrist. He is going to facilitate the conversation that we have tonight, and we welcome everybody that's here. So let's go ahead and get started.
Great.
Okay, great. So I thought I'd start off by kind of just a couple of reminders of what's happened in the first half of the book, and and then pick up with the second half, which heavily about what we can do, as opposed to the first half with a lot of explanatory stuff, I guess. But I guess the first thing to remember is his picture of the self, the parts of the self. And he talks about the heart and the spirit and the intellect, the appetitive or desiring soul. So there's different parts of our soul, he's suggesting. What I, can gather from reading and thinking about it, what he means by the heart is kind of the spiritual center, which includes the intellect. I'm not totally sure on that. He doesn't really say where he's drawing the lines, and of course, literal lines to draw. This is a spiritual thing, but so the spirit is, I think he's treating that as kind of an access point to God. It's like where we connect with God, and he analogizes that oftentimes to a mirror, right? That the divine light can shine on. Then the intellect, capacity to know truth, and then the appetitive or desiring soul is the lower part of the soul, the part of the soul that's most attached to the body, right? And this is the source of all trouble. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have temptation and so forth. But so a big part of the whole thing is how to deal with that, bring it in, harness it, bring it under control. So I think that's the main thing I wanted to remind you guys of. So starting, around chapter 8, kind of the way I wanted to frame this, might just kind of do a talk looking for your input and questions as we go along. As I'm moving forward, please stop and jump in anytime. But what I kind of had in mind to cover were basically three areas. The paths to spiritual knowledge that Ghazali seems to map out. What kind of knowledge is involved? And third, preparation for inspiration. How we prepare to get the spiritual insight, the light. So he presents the two ways as inspiration and learning. Those are the two basic ways to spiritual knowledge. The inspiration is not in our control. I mean, it comes when it comes. We can do certain things to be ready for it, and that's an important part of it. But and it's like study and reflection. So learning would be like, okay, you're reading the Quran or the Bible, and you think about it. What are the implications of that? What does that mean for me, and so forth. The inspiration is kind of like something from the outside. And I thought maybe a good way to start unpacking that is to look at a passage in the book. So if you have your book, this would be page 52 and 53. But one of his many remarkable passages. So, um, near the bottom of the, above the footnotes, but near the third of the way down, he says, thus the winds of divine favor, and that's one of his metaphors that he uses, winds or breezes of God. The winds of divine favor sometimes blow, and the veils, this is another metaphor, veiling and unveiling, the veils are drawn aside from the eyes of hearts, so that there is reflected in them something of that which is written upon the preserved tablet, which, as far as I can understand, means sort of divine ideas. Maybe something like attributes of God. You know, Muslims, theologians have worked out like 99 attributes of God that they find in the Quran and things like that. But so he continues. Sometimes this takes place, the wind of the divine favor. Sometimes this takes place during sleep, and thereby there is revealed that which will come into being in the future. The veil is completely lifted by death, when the covering is withdrawn. So there I kind of think of when the Apostle Paul says, you know, now we see through a glass darkly, then we'll see face to face. You know, in this life, in this world, we're not going to get a complete, you know, awakening or vision or whatever you want to call it. Then at other times, he says, the inspiration is made during waking hours, and the veil is lifted by a secret favor from God, the exalted. Some of the marvels of knowledge glisten in the heart from behind the curtain of the unknown. This may be like a dazzling flash of lightning, or it may be continuous up to a certain point, but its continuance is most rare. So I like this. I really like this metaphor of lightning. It's kind of like an aha moment, you know. I mean, it just suddenly comes to you. You don't have any control over that. And you know, and he suggests that's the more common experience than the continuous one. So, you know, getting a vision and staying in that state of insight, that's not the norm. Sort of something comes to you and you work with that. But that's inspiration, right? He's talking about inspirational knowledge here. Inspiration then does not differ from acquisition as regards the knowledge itself, but it differs only in the removal of the veil, for it is not accomplished by man's volition. And he says this way, the way of inspiration, is the Sufi way. Again, it's the synonym for mystical knowledge, or I mean, different words you can use, but that idea of unveiling, the light breaking through, it's the idea of revelation. You know, the biblical word for revelation is apocalypse, and apocalypse literally means unveiling, uncovering. But he's focusing in on the Sufi way a lot here in this second half of the book. And so, you know, the obvious question is, oh, wow, those are some of the best moments, you know, the aha moments. I mean, that seems like that's the most meaningful. How do you get that? And I think he's trying to work with that. One thing that is helpful to think about the different kinds of knowledges here is a distinction I've heard made between knowledge about, knowledge by acquaintance or by experience. Right? So the learning is a kind of knowledge about, and the inspiration is a kind of encounter, the way he presents it, I think. And I'll point to a couple of passages there, but you know, you can think about it this way. Say a dossier on somebody. You don't know the person, you got a dossier, you got all this information about the person. You don't know the person. You wouldn't say, I know the person in the sense that I know my wife, I know my friend, right? That knowledge of the person, the second kind, is the knowledge by acquaintance. So on this, he alludes to this kind of knowledge by acquaintance on page 59 and on page 70. So on page 59, this is in the upper paragraph, and I just wanted to point to one sentence here worth thinking about. About 6 or 7 or 8 maybe lines from the bottom of that top paragraph. It says, "For you can never apprehend anything save that which has reached you." I think that's really worth reflecting on. It's like, this is a kind of knowledge you cannot have until you have encountered the thing or the something or whatever, right? And this is on page 70. He quotes a verse from the Quran, which really, I think, is saying sort of the same thing. So on page 70, in the top paragraph, he quotes Quran 18:65. We taught him knowledge from our presence. In other words, God's presence was the source of the knowledge, right? It was only through the encounter there. So, so the kind of knowledge we have through studying, through learning, no, it doesn't require an encounter to sort of have a general idea of what we're talking about, right? But this inspirational knowledge does. I think he's suggesting no encounter, no inspiration. Okay, so let's go to the preparation stuff, and I think that's where it gets practical. So, what kind of, I mean, how do we get this information, this inspiration? Is there anything we can do? Is it just random? He says yes. There's some things you can do, right? So, in fact, on page 55, he sort of mentions what we can do and what we can't do. Page 55. He puts it in terms of choice. All right. The top paragraph. To attain to this point is a matter of his choice. Well, I'll continue on without looking at the first paragraph, but so too as a prolonging of this condition by warding off the suggestion of Satan. So he's talking about some attainment of knowledge there, but this is the part I want to focus on. Not by his choice, however, can he procure the gift of the mercy of God, the exalted. By what he has done thus far in these disciplines he's engaged, he has exposed himself to the breezes of God's mercy. And it only remains for him to wait for such mercy as God may grant him. So you can't know when the breezes come. He said, again, this metaphor of wind. It comes and goes. You don't know where it's coming from. You don't know where it's going, But you can, I think what he means is you can expose yourself to it when it comes. And when it's not there, you can wait. Then the question is, how do you do that? So to orient ourselves there, I want to look at one more passage with you, and then discuss a little more open discussion. Page 79. He describes the sort of, you could say, the situation of the soul and the question of how we orient the soul. A lot of this, I think, uh, the preparation has to do with orientation. So on page 79, this is, I mean, if I was gonna pick one that I thought this should be the most famous passage, I think this would be it. It's the second full paragraph. And he's talking about the heart as being between, something in between, right? The heart being between the demon and the angel is attracted by each of them. The heart is situated in between different influences. The prophet said, the heart has two calls. The one is from the angel and is a promise of good and belief in divine reality. Whoever finds this, let him know that it is from God. Praise be to him, and let him give thanks to God. The other call is from the enemy and is a promise of evil, a denial of divine reality, and forbidding of the good. Whoever finds it, let him take refuge with God from Satan the accursed. We live in the in-between, and we have all these influences. So, but what do you guys make of that? Let's unpack that a little bit.
You guys can feel free to go ahead and just chime in.
Yeah, I'm asking.
There's, yeah, yeah.
What does that ring true? First of all,
I mean, he talks a lot about his sense of that for everything God created, he also created its opposite, which is a little bit different from the Christian notion of the devils or Satan as fallen angels, starting out good, you know, and choosing evil. But really then talking about, you know, so much of the second part, he talks about the way in which we're pulled, and that, you know, that one wants to be open to inspiration, open to God, to get rid of stuff. But then he talks about lust and anger and fear and, you know, all the things that, I mean, things we call vices. It talks about you can get distracted by your love of what you have on, and, you know, things like that. So it seems as though there's a sense that we lost two people here, looks like. I don't know.
No, I spotlighted you so that I can make sure we see you.
Oh,
you open
okay.
up the screen for the people talking, I guess.
Yeah. But it seems as though all kinds of things that we call vices can be the things that pull, and then that blocks the inspiration part. At least that's kind of my take on what he's saying.
Right.
There's the kind of the this worldliness and the other worldliness.
Yeah. So we're sort of in between two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and maybe that's, you know, this is, I mean, the way the Greeks talked about it, we're animals who are more than animal, right? We have this part that's capable of you know, attraction to the divine, and then we have this part of us, the animal part, is grounded in this world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the human condition. You can't get away from it, no matter what, right? But the sort of metaphor of higher and lower, and living to the higher and pulling against the lower, or keeping the lower in its place, it's not necessarily, I mean, you can't get rid of it, and it's not necessarily bad per se, you know, but if it becomes predominant, or if it takes control, then you're definitely off the course. But when it comes to the inspiration, I think he's really saying you've got to sort of shut it out, or quiet these influences, or something like that, right? He has lots of metaphors for this. I think I mentioned last time there's a beautiful analogy in Plato's Laws where he talks about us being like puppets pulled by many strings, human nature, and there's these steely cords of passion that are always pulling us down to, you know, what you might call this worldly concern, and then there's a very subtle pull of the golden cord of reason, as he calls it, some with a divine pull, right? and that one is much harder to catch. You know, I mean, it's like, yeah, these lower ones, they demand your attention. You know,
Mhm.
calls them violent chords of passion, but that golden chord is much more subtle. You might not even notice it unless you're really paying attention. That's, I think that's really along the lines of what Ghazali wants to say is, you really have to attend to that higher pull and calm down. You have to do both. I mean, it can't be one or the other, right? I mean, because if you're being pulled away by those lower chords, then you cannot attend to the higher chord. You probably won't even notice. um, so it's sort of so the way that image is used in this Platonic dialogue is, he says, well, you know, the key is you let yourself be pulled by the higher chord, but you counter pull against the lower chords, right? So when you feel and you learn to establish this kind of equilibrium where you're going to take care of your bodily needs and, you know, appropriately indulge as needed, right? We got to eat, we got to sleep, all this stuff. But they've got to be under control, tamed like a horse or something, right?
Mhm.
I think I appreciate all the different distinctions because I think sometimes we might feel certain ways or we might think certain ways and think, is that just me? You know, is that, you know, so I think I appreciate all the different levels and the different distinctions that kind of unravel the complexities of the human mind. You
I
know,
have to thank all of you and apologize. I have to leave. I have muscle spasms in my leg right now, and I have
Oh,
Sorry to hear that, but yeah, I hope you get better there.
sorry, Susan, you muted yourself halfway through, but
muscle spasms in my leg. I have to walk around. So I want to thank you very much. And I'll look forward to watching the replay.
okay, I was going to say, if you want,
you.
you can turn off your screen and mute yourself if you want to keep listening. You can always do that too.
Oh, okay, great. Let
Yeah,
me
that'd
be
fine.
fig-
If you
figure
want,
that
you
out.
could, yep, you could turn off your screen because I know muscle spasms stink.
There
So
we go.
there you go.
Yeah.
And you can feel
Thanks,
free to walk
Susan.
around without us watching you
Great. Okay, thank you.
and
Yeah,
chime in
Bye-bye.
whenever needed if you want.
yeah,
But I
yeah.
appreciate it because sometimes, you know, we think certain things through life. We learn, you know, through different paths that we follow in life. And so I think it helps to know, like, yes, that's normal. I think sometimes you might question your own sanity, you know, and so it's kind of interesting to
Gonna
listen
unpack
and
that.
learn and hear the different complexities that do exist, that can exist in our minds, you know. So I appreciate
Right.
listening to that and learning that.
Yeah, so much of this part, it struck me as though just kind of some of the disciplines that he implies you need to have are, I mean, there's so much like a lot of the spiritual writings of Christian
Yeah.
saints, mystics, and so on, that need to quiet the senses, to quiet the passions, you know, being open to inspiration, open to the light, and the kind of discipline that you know, that kind of single focus,
Right.
and just and then he, you know, he really deals with a lot of things that we would call vices, but also just distractions, you know, and
Yeah.
how do we kind of shield from those things, you know?
Yeah. It is remarkable how similar the
Yeah.
mystical writings are in several traditions. I mean,
Mhm.
but yeah, which you know, maybe suggested there's something to it, you know.
Yeah.
There's you know, I mean, so these guys are unpacking elements of experience that they've had, you know.
Mhm.
They've made this trek and they're trying to help us, you know, novices or, you know, lesser experienced, to, you know, take the steps through. Yeah, one thing you mentioned there, Pamela, was I think focus, is that the word you used, or focusing the
Yeah.
mind? That's right. So I think that's one of the keys for him. For all these mystics, so you gotta focus the mind, and in ordinary daily activities, that's hard to do. So it takes, I mean, it's hard to focus on one thing. It's hard to give your attention, especially if it's something spiritual, intangible like that. So he talks about this in terms of remembrance of God, right? You're trying to fix the mind on God, and that requires turning your thoughts away from the present world, as he calls it, the present world, right? But I mean, one of the greatest things about reading this book is all of the metaphors that used to help illuminate. So, I mean, two that are heavily emphasized in this part, and that I want to discuss with you guys is the doors, the various doors, and also the heart as a fortress. Well, when they actually come together. So he talks about these doors, and he ends up bringing them into this metaphor of the heart as a fortress. So, so what do the doors stand for exactly, do you think?
Well, when he starts talking about the doors, I mean, he talks about one door, which seems to be the door to the external world, and the other door to the world of spirit.
Yes.
Or spirits, plural, but and then so much of his elaboration is on how do we have that door to the world of spirit wide open.
Yes. So then that's it. And the door to the what did you call the other door? The door to
the external world.
The external world.
Yeah.
He specifies the world of the five senses, right?
Yeah.
So and that's where distractions can come into play. The senses, too much going on, can't focus. But so there's two kinds of doors that we need to close in order to get the spiritual door open, I guess, if you want to put it that way. He talks about the doors of the senses and the doors of the appetites.
Yeah.
The senses are the external door, so to speak, right? And the appetites are the internal door. He calls it the internal doors. There's a lot of those. And so, so these doors symbolize influences, is one way he puts it. There's these incoming influences all the time. And we want to open ourselves up to some. And that word I didn't hear that. Was that a kid? Or? Oh.
He usually has one pop in.
Somebody from the gallery,
Yeah, he likes to pop his head in.
He's occupied apparently in the other room, but somehow it picked up his voice. So I heard it hit mute. As soon as I see I turn yellow, I hit mute.
Yeah. So, and this is actually in the Western tradition. Sometimes this is the spiritual open door has been talked about in terms of the open soul. He actually quotes a Quranic passage that talks about the open and closed heart. I thought it might be helpful here to look at that passage. This is on page 136. Here's the end of the book. And this is just a marvelous verse. 136, and this is down in the second full paragraph. It's in the italics. Whoever God wants to guide, he expands his breast to accept Islam. which means submission, right? And whoever he wishes to misguide, he makes his breast tight and constricted. There's the open and the closed heart. Now it sounds like there he's saying God closes people's hearts.
Yeah.
And this reminded me immediately of the Old Testament passage where it says God hardened Pharaoh's
Right.
heart, for example, right?
Hardened
And you're
Pharaoh's
thinking,
heart.
wait a
Yeah.
minute. What
Yeah.
about free will?
Yeah.
And there's the best commentary I've heard on this was from Erasmus, the
Mm.
16th century, I guess, 16th century
Yeah.
um, Catholic thinker. He said the hardened or soft heart, the hard or soft heart is determined by its disposition, just as the same sun melts the ice but hardens the clay. Depends on the disposition of the, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that goes with that orientation thing. So, same God acting, right? But depending on our disposition, we get or not. You have the similar thing in the parable of the sower, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cast the seed on there's the rocky soil and it doesn't take, and there's the falling among thorns, with symbolizing the cares of life, and which goes with some of the stuff he's saying here. So it grows up, but it kind of gets choked out. And then there's the good soil, which is receptive. This idea of receptivity is important for him. So that leads to the question of how do you get a receptive heart, right? But maybe before we go to that and talk about specific ways, look at the heart as a fortress analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you get from that? So the heart is a fortress with all these doors that need to be defended against what?
Well, one of the things I keep going back to is how much he enumerated a lot of vices and distractions. I mean,
Yeah.
he talks about anger, appetite in a general way, but he talks about greed, he talks about envy, gluttony,
Yes.
excess, the love of adornment, haste, stinginess, fear of poverty, gossip, calumny, and just kind of a intellectual egotism. So, all those things are the things that the heart has to kind of guard against.
Right.
And I mean, there's such human things,
Right.
It's a lot of doors. It's a lot of doors
right.
of different things to guard against, right?
Yes, yeah. And a lot of those things that can intrude, distract, and so on. Evil thoughts.
Right. Which he says some are involuntary. It kind of goes.
Yeah, and he goes through a whole thing about that there's no fault in the involuntary unless you. But he goes to like 4 steps, until you like really decide to kind of stay with it and then enact it. I gathered.
Yeah. One thought that occurred to me is the importance here of he's stressing you got to know the ways of Satan, is what he said, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ways he can enter the fortress.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought of Sun Tzu, his Art of War, and the rule number 1 is you must know your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I would quote the full passage there from it's part of a larger sentence in Sun Tzu. He says, if you know your enemy and yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. You know yourself, but not the enemy. For every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. if you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle.
Mm,
And that brings in the, of course, Ghazali talks about this as the sort of personal jihad, right?
yeah.
So especially with the appetites, that's where you have to fight. So with the sensations, it's more of just getting away, collecting your thoughts, focusing. But that jihad, it really needs to be taking place before you try to come and meditate or the inspiration, because you're not even going to get close to that if you're overwhelmed by all these other influences. But knowing your enemy, and so I think that's the way he presents it. All of these are specific ways he can get you, right? And so you got to be on guard to you got to know what the temptations are and the way that you can be defeated if you're going to expect to win. And one thing I noted, that even good things can trip you up, like,
Yeah.
right? Like, you know what I'm talking about, Pamela?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that struck me, and I've mentioned it a couple times already, but when he talks about the love of adornment, and I keep thinking about, Islamic art that I've seen in art museums and how ornate it is, how decorated it is. And yet he's talking about adornment as a distraction. And yet, I mean, on one hand, that adornment was designed for the glory of Allah, and on the other hand, adornment can just be a distraction. He talks about, you can go to prayer and then look at your gold rings,
Right.
something like that. As all of a sudden you're
Virtually anything can be.
what you've got on.
Yeah.
Right. So the thing can be good. Well, and then his other thing is when he talks about Satan, it's like, one of the tricks of the delusions is that, that something that is evil is made to seem good.
Yes.
And that's part of the trickery of it,
Right. So there's two kind of trickeries there. Possibly is one is you make something evil look good.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is you use something good to distract from the main thing, right?
Yes, yeah. You use it to excess, or you
right
fixated on.
Yeah, I was thinking of the analogy that I heard a couple of years ago, where there were some families from Puerto Rico that came over to Florida to live, and the father had said to my father that it was very easy to see the devil in things in Puerto Rico and to know what was not good, what was good,
Mm-hmm.
what was from God, what was not from God, And he said, but now that we live over here in the United States, like in the country in Florida, he said, it's so very difficult to see what is good and what is not good, like what is good and not good for our children, what is good and not good for food, what is good and not good for, he said, it's just so much more difficult here because there's so much more stuff. There's so much more here.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, how interesting that must be.
Yeah.
Like, I have fasted many times, and many times I've said food is such a, it's so, sometimes you have to think we all have an addictions to something, and there's, it's how our brains act to things. And there's many times that I've fasted for 10 days, nothing, but I would do a master cleanse. I did it multiple times in my lifetime. And it's a 10-day fast, and and you just get how addicted you are to certain foods even, and it's like, wow, that's sometimes I would fast during a period of like major life change, to help me with some clarity in any of that. Like if I was going to move, from Florida to North Carolina, I would fast during that period of time, just for 10 days, just to, to make sure like what was I getting, what was coming to me, because you realize just how much certain things just suck you down, but you don't realize it until it's not there. So, sometimes it's like getting to see what is controlling you. It's very very interesting. It's very different. So that's what I was thinking of when you were saying how clearly it is
The
perhaps to see
awareness
things.
you have. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and very quickly, I would like to say welcome to, we have 2 new people that have joined us. We have Dot and Laura.
Welcome.
Laura, so if you feel free to chime in, if you feel like you need to chime into something. So if you'd like to answer or say anything, and Susan,
Yeah.
if you're still walking around and your muscles have now relaxed and you'd like to go ahead and interject anything anywhere, feel
Yes,
free to as well. Want to make sure that you're
Hello.
still, you know.
So I attended the last meeting you had. Unfortunately, I found out pretty late, and I didn't have the opportunity to read the book.
Mm.
But I was still curious about this theme because it's about a spiritual journey of a human being, and not any human being, but from a Muslim world. I'm a Christian Orthodox, and I was very curious because we live in a global world, and I tried to understand what the spiritual journey of a Muslim can be. And I remember Scott said that this Al-Ghazali was not feeling very authentic, and he just left the classroom and he went out of the school and never came back. I was thinking, look, what a similar journey to any of us, and especially in the Christian Orthodox world. I live in London, by the way, but I am from the Eastern Europe, and there is a book actually written by Saint Nicodemus of the Mount Athos, which is called The Unseen Warfare, The Unseen Warfare, and he talks about the same theme, the same inner fight against evil, against the evil inside of us, because you talk about this superior jihad, which is inside of us. And yes, this is pretty much the same. I'm sure you touched this subject, but I was thinking we can approach this theme from 2 kind of perspectives. We can say, oh, Al-Ghazali, what a nice guy. You actually try to understand the world and trying to understand the better way to approach this reality and so on. Second one is, you Al-Ghazali ignorant, you didn't follow the path of your ancestors, and which told you what you have to do. Because before us, many people did this. The same journey we try to do, to take, they did it already. I think about even the Greek philosophers. They gave us examples, and I remember that Plato, Aristotle, and some other philosophers are painted on a church, on an Orthodox church in my town, because they are actually considered pre-Christians, and they honor their effort, spiritual effort, to understand the world. And I think what Al-Ghazali does is an amazing approach in this very strange secular world. I expected to find not hundreds, but at least tens of people here after the first meeting, because this theme is amazing, and I found just few. It's I think it's the marvelous of the heart of our times. People are not very compatible with this kind of theme, because we live in an AI era, on a computer era. That's a little bit strange.
Yeah.
But yes, in those times, people did appreciate their forefathers and their ancestors, and I think Al-Ghazali is one of the examples of this lost sheep, somewhere on the field, which tried to find the right path, and he did, and he his effort, and I will read the book, but still I I try to have glimpses of it through your impressions, through your ideas, and the guy is amazing because he is very determined in this world to leave any material advantage behind and try to find his own identity. And I think this is our journey. That's why we recognize ourselves in this kind of approach. You know? It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the power of it, is
I can talk
rings
6
true.
hours about that, but I'll stop here.
That's great. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that term journey again. That's the way that he opens the book. I mean, he mentions that and suggests that the purpose of life is the journey to God. And but it's not an easy journey. It's not an automatic journey. It's and there are many ways to go off the path. And I think that's what he's trying to clue us into, both the right orientation and the wrong orientation that pulls us away. One thing that I'd like to go back to in relation to, you brought it up earlier, Pamela, about I guess I'd call it the progression to sin, or there's these steps. So I wanted to look at that, page 78. He kind of sums it up there, and then he elaborates, I think, on page 118 and 19, but kind of sums it up here at the end of the first paragraph. Then the suggestion stirs up desire. Desire stirs up resolution. Resolution stirs up intention. And intention stirs up the members of the body. So, and he presents this at the beginning of the paragraph in terms of moving the will, moving wills. One thing I immediately think of is the story of the Garden of Eden, right? And Eve, kind of, I've always thought, a very sophisticated sort of analysis of the process of sin there, if you think about it, because and let me just remind you guys, or if anybody hasn't heard it here for the first time, what is the parts of the story were, and then maybe we can unpack that, because that's one of the nice things about the story of the Garden of Eden is we have a concrete picture in our minds, you know, what's happening. So if you remember, the Eve is they're in the garden, and the serpent comes up, which is always a symbol for, you know, demonic force in the Bible. The serpent, not always, but often, the serpent comes up to her and says to her, well, I should back 1 second. Remember, God says you can eat of any of the trees of the garden you want, except for this one, right? In the knowledge of good and evil. And yeah, so it's clear directive. But the serpent comes up and says, did God really say you cannot eat from any of the trees of the garden? And that is tricky, right? The way he words that, did God really say? And then he says something God didn't say. So what's tricky? I mean, what's if you would look at that as a step on the progression to sin, what is, how would you describe that step?
Well, later when he talks about the progression, you referenced 119, he talks about suggestion, inclination, conviction, and decision. So basically that's suggestion. It's kind of putting something in the head that says, no, wait, what was it? What, did I hear it right? You know, that kind of,
Right.
just fostering some uncertainty, and then kind of pushing it to say like, well, of course, why he said that was because you'll be like God,
Yeah,
if you eat this.
right.
So that
It
kind of
all,
moves it into an inclination.
yeah, or at least it opens the way to it.
Yeah, yeah.
There's another element there too that I like to point out is um, he makes the God's prohibition sound a lot more onerous than it is.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he says, "Did God say you can't eat from any of the trees of the garden?"
Mm-hmm.
Right
Mm-hmm.
now, you're making it feel deprived. Well, no, it's just the one tree, just the one
Yeah.
tree. So there's a deceptive element, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
trickery, a little bit of trickery. The suggestion is there, planted into the mind, but has Eve sinned at this point?
No, no.
Hasn't sinned, right? It's like those involuntary thoughts he's
Yeah,
talking.
yeah.
So then the next part of the story is, where'd it go? The serpent says that you shall not surely die if you eat from the
Mm-hmm.
fruit of the tree. But when you eat it, you'll become like God,
Mm-hmm.
knowing good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, so what's happening there? There's still deception.
Mm-hmm.
I think a new element enters a little more clearly is desire.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the good of it. Here's what you will get if you eat from the tree. You'll be like God. Wow, that sounds pretty good. Well, I could be like God. But she still hasn't sinned, right? She still has not sinned. So then it says she saw the fruit that it was good for food.
Mm-hmm.
So she's noticing now, oh, it looks pretty good. And she takes it and eats it. So then I always ask my students when I'm talking about this, at what point does sin happen? Where exactly? Is it when she bites the fruit?
If you're Al-Ghazali, it's once you've made the decision in your mind to do it.
Yeah.
And then you do it. But it's like a couple of times he says, but once you've decided not to obey God or not to follow the light, even before you do the action, the sin is there. At least that's how I read him,
Yeah, I think you're right. So like when you're biting the apple, it's already been done.
Yeah.
It doesn't say apple. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you extrapolate that at our
Sure.
society, in our life? How? Because that it's a practical way to see things. Because people think, okay, very nice person, I'm doing this and I'm doing that. But if you try to apply this idea in daily life, you can make a statistics how many people are actually sinners on this in our country, in our society, in our group, on our planet. What do you think about that?
How many sinners?
No, if we think about the moment when the sin takes place, okay, we can think about us, about our family, about our groups, about the people around us. So in that moment, everything becomes very practical, and we try to find out what happens in our society. And we find out actually that people become from, I say that very, very nice, innocent people, really sinners. Because from our perspective, if we analyze correctly, they are committed sin. committing sin. So this is the point. You understand me? I don't know if I'm very. I come from a country which was a little bit confused about the principles. It come from communist background, and they became suddenly all Christians. Yeah, and yes, and if you go to the statistics in Wikipedia, they said, oh, 95% Christians, 95%. So I looked at the background of this, the base of these statistics, and they said the statistics was done basing, how to say, sorry, using two questions. If God exists, if God is important in your life, okay? 95% of people said yes to these two questions. And they all, in the statistic, became Christians. Okay, if they are all Christians and they answer yes to these two questions, automatically the tribunals and the police will close tomorrow because they have nothing to do. You understand what I say? This is the practical thing. I understand sinners, the theoretical level, but in our life, because Christianity is not a philosophy, it's a way of living. And
yeah, except one of the things about Christianity is it has always been a collection of the few people who become saints and the rest who keep having something to repent for or something to grow in.
Yes.
But
So
I think
you said no.
What you were getting at though was also the thing between what's the intention of the heart and the commitments of the mind and action, and that if one has already by disposition been inclined to to greed, to lust, to revenge against this one or that one, that there's a sense that even before it's enacted, there's already that internal sinfulness. It's kind of like there's an old story. I mean, Jimmy Carter just had his birthday. Old story about Jimmy Carter, who is a very virtuous man, obviously, being asked by some reporters if he had ever committed adultery, and he said, "I have lusted in my heart," and he's really quoting right out of the Sermon on the Mount. Right. When Jesus says, that if one looks with lust, he's already committed adultery in his heart. And I think that's kind of what Al-Ghazali is talking about, is that the disposition to, or the, at least the movement toward, is something that happens first within. And a lot of times, spontaneous spontaneous actions that are harmful, we can impute them as crime, but moral theologians don't always impute them as sin because they're spontaneous, they're impulsive, and so on.
Like if you do something because you're schizophrenic and think about attacking you, then you wouldn't. You wouldn't be held morally accountable.
Right.
That's a ridiculous example, but one distinction that might help here is the distinction between being in a state of sin and committing a sin.
Right.
So the committing sin is a particular act, right? Whereas you were talking with the disposition, you're inclined in that direction, right? You just haven't had the opportunity yet, so to speak, right? Or you're, maybe you don't want to, but you're not well guarded enough that you couldn't fall in quickly to temptation. Christina, are you saying something? I can't hear.
I'm informing my 20-year-old that just walked in the door for dinner in the kitchen because she can't figure out.
You look very reflective.
I was like, she can't figure out what she's looking at.
Got a pearl of wisdom or something.
Oh, yeah.
No, I wish.
Yeah, so I mean, but thinking about this in terms of the ways of the enemy and how closing the right doors, and I think you can think of the progression to sin along the way with that. So if you can detect these steps on the way, it's easier to, right? You know, like if Eve could have said immediately, wait a minute, you're trying to trick me. I know what you're doing. You know, then it would have short circuited the process. Once you're already at the point of saying, hey, this is interesting, I might consider, you know, you're basically already gone there. So, so being aware of the types of influence, the specific influences, like all those particular appetites, the types of distractions, ways that you can be overtaken by them, the way they can insinuate their way in.
Mhm.
All of that's important for guarding the fortress of the heart, I think is and it's that's sort of the grunt work, so to speak. That's the threshold beyond which, you know, nothing's going to happen. So that's what I meant when I say this jihad of the heart, which means struggle, striving, is, you know, you already would have had to do a lot of that before you can get to the point where you're going to be getting a lot of inspiration, probably, unless you're one of those who's gives some kind of special situation.
Mhm.
God, right? Jonah is seized, you know, with this you know, task, this mission. He's not obviously not in the mood or whatever, but that's a rare case. We're talking about being ready to get that insight from God, those receive that light, get the reflection in the mirror, all of the different metaphors he's using to try to help us get there. So there's the you know, there's several steps or several types of work preparation we need to do. That there's that battle, there's
Mhm.
the focus, all of those things. One more thing I wanted to
Hi
point.
there, how are you?
Hey, Susan, how are you doing?
Fine, how are you?
I'm bored to
I think she was on the phone, so I just muted her.
Oh,
Sounds like.
okay. Yeah, it sounded like she was surprised to see us or something. Yeah. No, I wanted to talk with you guys about some of those. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm saying you're right. Lursher, is that your name, sir?
My name is
Lursher?
Lucian. Lucian.
Lucian. Okay, that must be your last name on there, or you have.
No, that is just my email.
Oh, okay,
Incorrect.
okay. No, you brought up and you brought up practicality. You know, practically what, you know, what we're talking about, a lot of ideas here about the kind of way we need to think about this. And I want to get to that in terms of the specific disciplines that Ghazali touches on. But one last thing before that, I wanted to mention something that really struck me was the safest heart. He didn't use those words exactly, but he talks about these different degrees of, you know, spiritual development.
Mhm.
And on page 127, he mentions the people who, you know, yeah, he raises this question: can anybody ever get to the point where, you know, they're really not vulnerable to temptation, and you know, and they're totally focused and all the rest. And on 127, he raises the possibility of the rare people who might get close. And he says, it's the sentence about maybe 10 lines from the bottom. He says, this cannot be conceived save of a heart over which love has gained the mastery, that it has become as one utterly devoted. The heart has become as one. That love, and I thought of an analogy of, you know, romantic love, right? So if if you are in love, as they say, with somebody, and it's fresh and exciting, and you're into them, right? And you sort of forget about the world around you. It's like that is the only thing there.
Mhm.
I wonder if that's kind of what he means. Like, you're so enraptured with love. Love has so mastered your heart that you're all into that, and nothing can penetrate, so to speak. But even if none of us can really get to that point, I think he rejects the idea of total invulnerability. But that might be a clue to, so the safest heart would be the one most mastered by love.
Mhm.
And so, in this, of course, St. Augustine talked about good love and bad love, and directing your love to the higher things versus the lower things. This is one way you can think about all this is, these attractions, right? We have these attractions from every direction, and we are moved to do things, the things that we move towards doing by desire. And so you can look at this, in terms of, Augustine talked about in terms of different kinds of love. So, do I love God more than what? Fill in the blank, right? There's all kinds of things that we can pursue. And the question, so I think this idea is your love is so dominated by God, in a sense, right? That is the focus of your love so much that all of the other loves get subordinated to it. And so, and Augustine talks about that in terms of will too. Like, where does good will and bad will come from? The fundamental problem is good will or bad will, right? And he says, well, good will comes from good love, and bad will comes from bad love. And then goes on to explain, good love is loving things in the right order. Good love is loving the higher thing over the lower thing. And bad love is loving the lower thing over the higher thing. And so, and there's a ranking of love. It's not just so, okay, loving your family, that's a good kind of love. But if you love your family more than God, it's not where it's supposed to be. Ordering your loves is another way to think about this. What do I love?
Well, can I say something about it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I've heard somebody, which is actually from Jewish background, on the internet saying the most difficult thing in this existence is to love God with all your power, all your soul, all your strength, so all your mind. And he said it's very difficult because at a certain point, doubt and your analytic mind interferes. So it's very difficult. Okay. Secondly, we have a problem as humans. We have a problem. First of all, I see it's a little bit of a culture difference here. I will have a difficulty. Probably it will take a few weeks to communicate with you because I'm from a different country. But the thing is, words are incomplete. Words are very incomplete. Words cannot express what you want. You say about love, good love, bad love. Okay, if somebody will ask us to define love, we are dead. We cannot define. We cannot say anything. We cannot define love. We cannot define truth. We cannot define music, art. We cannot define anything because these are matters of heart. They are not matters of the mind. And for me, I try to simplify things. It's not like that, but I try to simplify, and I try to understand them as things of the mind, things of the heart. Things of the mind can be explained and defined in matter of words, things of the heart, it's impossible because it's something else. And we all know what that means. If somebody said, because I saw a reporter enjoying himself on the street, asking what his nausea is. And people ask, how can you, what is nausea? And they said, when you feel bad, when you vomit. No, but what is nausea? They couldn't explain. Everybody knew what nausea is, but they couldn't explain. Love, beauty, truth, we know. So, okay, people can say, oh yeah, but truth can be explained in rational terms. Yes, if truth is some kind of logic sentence, but if it's about truth of life, no, it's a matter of the heart, of the soul. You cannot explain. So in that moment, your intuition, your common sense, your higher dimension level enters in the scene, and you can explain something. So the point is, that's why you try to explain so many metaphors and so many fragments of this book about very difficult explanations of Al-Ghazali, but even Jesus had the parables. He didn't explain directly. He used the parables. He didn't, you see, because he couldn't explain directly, and probably he wanted to address to those people who were really capable to understand. There are levels and levels of understanding. And you spoke about the doors, so many doors. Okay, this reminds me of Kafka, The Castle. Kafka didn't try to explain anything. He just want to show something. He showed when you enter in some kind of maze of our destiny, of our society, there are doors you have to take, and finally you get to your final destiny. So this is the thing. So it's difficult to explain higher levels of existence in, let's say, ordinary words and ordinary language. You need to use that's why the Al-Ghazali said heart, because this is another thing, mind and heart. And in Orthodoxy, you know what is the thing which is the most praised is the prayer of the mind and heart. So the mind goes to the heart. Why the mind goes to the heart? This is a thing which goes back hundreds and thousands of years. Why? Because they have this intuition. So they gave us all the examples we wanted, we needed actually, but we ignored it and thought that our technology, our superior technology, was actually our superior, was equivalent with our superior kind of existence or thinking. But no, they were pretty much the same as us, and they had the same kind of approach, and they gave us all the inheritance we need, or the legacy we need.
Yeah, I think Ghazali basically would agree with you on it's like the thing itself, so to speak. I mean, that we're journeying toward, and the journey itself cannot adequately be put into words. Now the Catholic language for this is ineffable, the ineffable, right?
Yes, exactly this I said. Yeah.
Right. And I think he's completely on board with that. And yet we also need to talk about it, right? Somehow, and it helps us somehow to talk about it. So, and this is a kind of paradox that philosophers and theologians worked on. So it seems like there has to be this kind of combination for us to develop. I mean, if you precisely because, as Ghazali said, these lightning strikes, these moment of inspirations, it's not constant. We're not in constant state of totally clear vision. We see everything. And with those, because of those inklings and stuff, we have to try to orient ourselves toward it. And it helps to do that, to talk about things and use these metaphors. I think you're right. The metaphors are irreplaceable. I mean, but because you can't get it. I mean, what is love? Yeah, you always have to say love is like this or like that, right? But I think that's the way the Greek philosophers talked about this is distinguish between two types of reason. There was a reason which is kind of intuition, which I think you used the term for there, and that's the higher form of reason. So you're seeing the way Plato put it, is the thing itself, right? You're getting a grasp on intangibles like justice and virtue, and you're sort of grasping what it is. But then there's the second, called it literally second reason, secondary reason, which is what we usually think of as reasoning. So, and the value of that for Plato, and I think for theologians and others who think about this stuff too, is it helps to work out the implications of the experience, right? Okay, having experienced this, now what? What do I do? How should I live? And if you were constantly having, pure inspiration all the time, I suppose you could just follow that and you wouldn't have to reason things out. But because they are, sort of on God's command, not ours, we have to think, well, how do I live in light of that? So I think there's this sort of, I don't want to use too philosophical, a kind of dialectic, a kind of back and forth between the mind and heart that, adepts, like people, experienced guys like Ghazali, they try to combine those, So he's talking about, I think you're totally right. He's talking about the experience that I'm talking about. It's the experience we need to get a handle on, but we're getting his guidance through his words and through his metaphors and through reasoning out the consequences and the rest. But maybe that's just part of the human condition too. We have a mind that needs to think, and we have, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think for me, a kind of a takeaway from the whole book is, I recall when I read the Quran, I was just really struck by how otherworldly it is in its orientation in so many ways. That what really matters. And I think one of the things that he does here is to remind us, with all of his analytics and his steps and so on, though, is that there is within us as humans something which is drawn to make an idol of something that is not God. And then he's looking at how do we kind of, have that fortress that will somehow close us out so that we don't make other things God. One of the metaphors he uses that I just loved, it was on 128, 129. Whoever fixes his clutches on this present world and then desires to get rid of Satan is like a man dipped in honey who thinks the bees will not alight on him. If you're trying to have it both ways, that you've made something an idol and you're grasping tightly to that idol, then those doors to God are not going to be open. So I think for me, that's kind of the big takeaway from it, is to say that those disciplines, that awareness and so on, that he gives so many examples and so much analysis of kind of how to be a discerning person, how to be a discerning person of faith.
Yeah. What about you other two? What are your big takeaways from? I know you had Luciano. You said Luciano.
Yeah, my name is Lucian. Yes,
Yes.
and now I have
I know you haven't had a chance to read,
I
but
have a face now. I think.
you've had this. You heard the whole conversation, so
Yeah.
the
No, I
larger
have a
takeaway.
question for Pamela. I have a
Okay.
question for Pamela. So it's amazing. So I see a cross behind you. So
Mhm.
what did attract you to this conversation about a Muslim?
Well, part of it is it's my ministry. And I've worked with Atlantic Institute before. I've always been a student of religion. I'm a Catholic nun, and I teach theology for St. Leo University at its extension in South Carolina. But I work with ecumenical and interreligious. But I've visited mosques a number of times and have read the Quran. When I lived in Michigan, I was in what they called a scholar trialogue with Christian, Jewish, and Islamic people. So this was kind of a natural thing for me to sign up for. So
Yeah. So
actually, that's an Orthodox cross behind
what I
me.
actually wanted to say was that we have this kind of religious, spiritual tendency in us, and from my country, I know a name which was Michel Eliade. I don't know if you know. He was a teacher. He was a professor, university professor in Chicago. Even some other people quote him now. He wrote the history of religions, and he said, I have my own convictions. I will not tell you my conviction, my religious conviction, but I'm very convinced that we are all some kind of religious creatures. So despite of what happens around us, we tend to find a metaphysical sense in our existence. So I think this is the main thing in what Al-Ghazali did, because he left a materialistic kind of existence to for a spiritual path. So and in this moment when we talk, we are here and we have computers. It's very nice, but in the mountains of my country and also in other places, there are monks living in the cracks of a mountain, in the cave somewhere, like 500 years ago. And I remember, for example, an Italian, he was very, very surprised. He saw a stone which was carved in some kind of, let's say, cave, and he found out that somebody lived there for 15 years. And he said, to live here for 15 years, I couldn't. He tried to explain to himself how that can be possible from his perspective, and he couldn't. And he said, no, I wouldn't do this. It's very difficult. And not only, but that kind of monk living there was visited by a king to ask for advice. So he said, why? Wait. Well, because this guy living there for 15 years was very educated, very wise, very, let's say, exercised in the things of the world. But even like that, he lived outside of the world. And the king, who was confronting the Turks, and he had wars and all, came to talk to him for advice, to ask him for advice. It was amazing. And this Italian guy was flabbergasted. He didn't understand how that can be possible. But yes, even so now in 2023, there are people living in the mountains, not even eating the usual things, just finding what is in the forest. Why? Because they try to find their own path in the old way. It's amazing. I think And this, I think, what Ghazali did. When he said that he left the classroom, and I was really impressed about that. So really,
Mhm.
Yeah. It's a great story.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was attracted by this kind of the idea that is Marvel of the Heart, but written by a Muslim.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I don't find any. I worked and had relationships with the people of all backgrounds and all kind of beliefs and all kind of races and all kind of ideas, and I never had any problems. And I try to understand them, and I was thinking that we all come from. It was a book written, I think, in my country. It was 10,000 cultures, but the same civilization.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think we are all the same. We are all the
Mhm.
same. So yeah,
Mhm.
somewhere in the past we have the same root, and
Mhm.
we all try to find our own, let's say, way in this kind of world. But we always find that we are all related. Doesn't matter. We are Muslim. We are. So I'm another question, which probably any of you can answer. Why do Muslim or Jews or Christians fight if they have the same God?
Mhm.
It's amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's a very good question. I mean,
The
and
great unanswerable.
Yeah, I
yeah,
was gonna say, I think sometimes there is not an answer for that because many
Yeah.
of us, I think, wonder that. And
Exactly.
we wonder why
Yeah.
people do things that are wrong.
And the
Yeah.
people that the circles that we all travel in, we end up with the like-minded Jewish person, the like-minded Islamic person, the like-minded Christian of whatever flavor, you know, and just struck by the common bonds. So
So
anyway,
I'll tell you
Christina, your
something. Which
child, your little boy has not popped in this time. Was he totally occupied in the other room? Almost every call that I've been on with Christina, her son at some point pops in and has to have his little head in the picture, and he's so cute.
He has been more occupied. He's got school he's got to finish. He has school that
Oh,
he still has to finish here tonight, and he's struggling. He's fighting it.
well,
yeah.
But he's I'm trying to get him to get over here so he can get on task so that we can get this done. So he was just over here a second ago.
sorry to be an intruder, but I want to say something. Which I know it's very difficult to communicate from another kind of perspective, but it's difficult. I want to say something. When I was in my country, I thought the government is corrupt. Okay, it was true, and they are to blame. The people, the politicians, they are to blame. When I took distance, I realized that not the politicians are to blame, and this is my problem. That's why I take a practical point of view. I realized that people are to blame. People, my people, which were near me, my people are
right.
corrupt, because without them, the politicians cannot do absolutely anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that was a revelation for me. And this is my problem. And that's why I said Christianity or any religion is not, there is no word religion. Religion is just a label, but it's a way of living. So if you are a Christian, you assume the principles, you actually take responsibility for the principles of the Christianity. So in that moment, you act in that way. How can you bribe someone in that moment?
Right.
And in that moment, you are surprised to find out that people of young people of 25 years, 25 years old, tell you that, well, in our country it's easy. You just give some money to the policeman, and we sorted out the problem. So I said, these are the future of my country. Okay, but I found out that happens everywhere. We can accuse Biden or Trump or whatever. No, they cannot exist without the base. So, okay, I can ask you something. It was a Holocaust in which nobody can explain. For me, it's another mystery, because I put questions to historians. I talk to historians, and different historians give me different answers. Why the Holocaust happened? Nobody knows for sure. They presume. Why? Because it was a meeting without minutes written, just with the conclusion written. And they cannot say why the Holocaust happened. Okay? So I asked, okay, what do you think Holocaust happened? Well, because they had some kind of an idea that the Jews are not good, or they can be harmful for their country. Okay, fine. But I said, okay, when Hitler had the idea to destroy Paris, because Hitler wanted to plow the area of Paris, this was his decision. The officers opposed, and they said, sorry, we can control Paris, it's ours now, we can use it, because it's ours. We conquered and it's fine. But what happened in case of the Jews? Nothing. But to kill the Jews, doesn't matter they are 200,000, or I don't know how many millions they say. You have to create an apparatus. To create an apparatus, you need guardians, you need executioners, you need officers, you need so many people around. You need builders to create this. So everybody had a consistent action in that direction. How? It was Hitler? No. There were tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. How? They didn't think? Or they said they were negligent? Or what? They participated too. So they were accomplices, in my opinion. So without these accomplices, Hitler couldn't get to his purpose.
Right.
Okay,
I
Jesus
think
comes, Jesus comes and said, love your neighbor as thyself. And people say, yeah, it's fine, good. But if you apply this principle, I don't enter into details because you can discuss it for hours. But if you apply this principle, you cannot harm anyone. You cannot harm the Jews. You cannot harm the Muslims. That's why we are here, because that's why I asked about the cross. Doesn't matter Muslim, doesn't matter Chinese. We are here because they are human beings in the same path. So we cannot do anything. So what is our action? What is our practical
well, I think
action?
if I may interrupt, I think one of the things that is, I mean, an answer that relates to Al-Ghazali is that people have to develop the gift of discernment, even if it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, and that many people prefer not to look deeply at what's going on. They find it easier not to look deeply within. And even if they have a twinge of guilt about something, to ignore that twinge of guilt. It's the heroes and the saints who step forward and very often get martyred for objecting to things. But there's, Prophet Jeremiah talked about the tortuous ways of the human heart. Who can understand it? And I think one of the things is there's something built into us that almost by nature gravitates toward naming somebody or some group as the enemy. And again, that's one of those things that a spiritual discipline will help break all that down. But but it seems to be a flaw of human nature that people want to name an enemy. I mean, you had a Holocaust in Germany, you have attacks on Armenians, you've had attacks on Kurds, you had Hutus and Tutsis, Hutus attacking Tutsis in Rwanda in the 1990s. And we say, how can this happen in, you know, the modern times and civilized people? Well, a lot of it is that there is something where people get a kind of mass hysteria about somebody they've decided is the enemy and have been persuaded that that's true, you know, and that it just seems to repeat. But if enough people have the gift of discernment and step out, then you begin to shift the power, you know.
Well, but what if this principle, love your neighbor is love thy neighbor is your love thy neighbor is yourself, will be put at the base of our education. Can you believe that? What if this principle will be used in schools?
Because it would change the world.
Okay, let's say yes.
Yeah.
So 1,200. I hope I remember well. Well, I like this little guy. I don't like his hair because it's a little bit crazy complex to me. But I want to say, what about this Sultan Saladin in the year 800 and something? He defeated the Third Crusade. Yes, Sultan Saladin, which was a Muslim. And he defeated the Third Crusade, and his generals asked for the execution of all crusaders. And he said, no. And he began to discuss with the crusaders. And his generals came, and it's a real story. They said, they came us to kill us. They came here to kill us. We have to kill them. We have to execute them all. And Saladin said a quote, which is pretty famous. He said, I warn you against shedding blood and indulging in it and making a habit of it, because blood never sleeps. This is an amazing expression. Blood never sleeps. 1,200 years ago. And he was so great in his reasoning and his solution of that. And he talked to the crusaders. He said, what do you want? Oh, we came here because this is our holy land. So, okay, you can come here, make your churches, do whatever. From that moment, the Christians began to live together with the Muslim in Jerusalem. Yeah. So that guy had a great attitude because he understood something. He has to respect life, and if he revenges, other people will come after him. Anyway, and I don't know if you know Crash, the movie Crash, 2009. Well, I recommend it because the movie Crash shows how people can think, and they try to show their amazing ideas at the beginning and what's their action later. It's amazing, that movie. It's really shows how contradictory can be people in their lives, just because they don't appreciate the difference between their principles and their really real actions in the world. And yes, I think in my opinion, when we talk about Al-Ghazali, we talk about Jesus, we have to talk about what we do tomorrow, what we do today, not about what happened to them. That is fine. They did. But, okay, from my perspective, I come from a communist country. And the communist country, I had a revelation when I was 14 years old. In a communist country, it was, they preached all atheist principles, and I was in doubt because I was 14. But my grandmother believed in something. My parents were not very practicing, but they have their beliefs. But one day we went, it was Easter, and we went to a church. And our habit is to take the flame, okay, or to light the candles and take these candles to home. And we went to a very long street, a boulevard. And when I turned back, it was amazing for me because it was like 1 kilometer, almost 1 mile of people with lighted candles
Mhm.
in the middle of communist times. And I was astonished. I was indoctrinated, they pressured by the communists and so on. But that image put me a question. They are all wrong? All these people are wrong? So I had a shock. And I even remember how I was dressed in that moment. It's like I would say 9/11 kind of
Mm.
event. That and I tried to understand after that. Okay, yeah, okay, I understand this, but what is the practical effect of all this? So everything we say, everything we do, we have to put out to put in practice in our daily life. Yeah. Sorry to tell all these stories, but
I
Yeah,
have
because-
one question, quick question, Lucian. I didn't hear, what country were you from? You know, you're in London, but you're from where?
I'm from Romania originally.
Mm.
Oh, Romania. Okay, I have a friend from Romania too. Okay, I was just curious because I didn't know what communist country you were talking about. My father's from Cuba, so there's always a
Yeah.
lot of discussion in our house growing up of communism and Cuba
Mhm.
and everybody. This is the one she's talking
I'm
about. This is
waving
Liam.
to him.
Yeah,
Hi.
this is Liam. Yeah,
Yes.
but thank you. I
William,
was
I like
curious.
seeing you pop in every now and then.
Yes.
He's not shy.
My ex-father-in-law is from the Czech Republic. So
yeah.
I know that's
Okay,
over near there. He doesn't you cannot say he's from Czechoslovakia. You have to say the Czech Republic.
Oh,
'cause
yeah.
he's
And
not.
Yes,
I
yes.
know a lot of
Slovakia.
Slovak people that it's Slovakia and that. Yeah.
Yes.
You don't
yes,
merge
so-
the countries. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm going to say good night to everybody.
Thank you very
Uh,
much for being on
yeah.
here.
Yes,
Thank you. I
yes, yes.
appreciate the conversation.
Mhm.
And I'm here around 2 hours now, so we do need to probably go, but I appreciate it. And
Bye-bye.
would
Bye.
Yeah,
Bye.
you
Have
know
a
it's going
good
well
night.
when you go
Have a
on.
good
right?
night.
All right.
Thank you,
I think
Christine.
let
guys.
someone else speak.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you very much.
And
Bye, guys.
Lucian.
And I don't know how Scott feels, but I know when I sent everybody's email that you got, I mean, I did have him in the CC field. He might appreciate if you wanted to email him or anything like that to have continued conversation somehow.
Sure, I
Anywhere.
can send you my slides or whatever,
Emails.
you know, yeah. it'd be
Okay.
Great to have a
Yeah.
Yeah,
conversation.
we never did
I
that.
like
did we?
I like your background, Scott. It's
Yeah, thank you very
amazing.
much.
you.
Not like mine,
Alright.
not like mine, but yours is very
Thank you.
scientific.
Bye-bye.